Chad, medieval man of science. Chad's long brown robe and dark hooded cloak covered all but his head, ankles, and feet. Chad is 30 years old. He's medium build, strong and muscular, though neither stocky nor tall. His face is tanned, and his hair is a sandy colour, though blonder in the summer and showing reddish tones in the winter. His eyes are brown with gold specks. They are almost almond-shaped, defined yet soft. They are clear and penetrating, but warm. The lines on his face are etched to remind the onlooker of a pleasant, jovial disposition, but underneath a character of seriousness and hard-won knowledge. His countenance traces a thoughtful, worn path. "If I told you, Marigold, that this water would cure you of barrenness, would you believe me? Would you put your faith in its special properties? Would you trust me that its power is true?" Marigold gazed at the silver ladle Chad held out towards her. Her eyes shifted to the rushing spout, spilling gallons of sparkling water, bouncing into the cobblestone trough below. She was heavy in thought. Chad was the local alchemist, and took trouble with village complaints. He lived deep in a beechwood forest in a hut, woven from branches and ferns. Heaven began on the tall tree-tops, the trees scattered but dense and symmetrical. The eye followed a green-leafed umbrella. Marigold reached for the ladle. The shiny liquid passed down her throat, and she nodded farewell to Chad. He tucked the silver spoon inside his cloak and headed to the stony trail down into the ravine. Marigold returned to her home to tend the fire for washing. She and Zack lived in the middle of a row of cottages along a dusty lane in Peschel, Venables. Tad took tumbling steps down the flint-strewn path, making speedy use of the sharp decline and rough exposed stones, which enabled him to hop from one to the next. At the bottom it levelled out into a winding sliver of earth, trodden from the dark ages, stretching 15 miles from the King's Castle at Wallingford, with the neck of the river at Henley-on-Thames. An old but well-kept horse pulled the two-wheeled wooden cart, full of sawyer's tools, baskets of clothing, bedrolls, and pots of pans. The two stubble-faced men walked on either side of the horse's bridle, speaking of the town they had encountered 7 miles back. One wore a red shirt and overalls. The other had a dark waistcoat vest over a short-sleeved gingham tunic. They spotted Chad and approached him with an eager openness. "Good day to you, gentlemen. This path has seen few and far between this morning. And where have you come from?" "We've travelled from Wickham, where we live. We're going to Swincombe to help in the forest through the summer. It shouldn't be far, should it?" "No," said Chad. "Under half an hour from here at the rate you're travelling. Wickham has a busy market, and the surrounding woodlands and tree folk make tables and chairs. We've travelled for 2 days, asking at small settlements and pubs for directions. We've been told that Swincombe is a large manor, mostly sheep and forestry, but wild boar roam the wood too. We will settle in a makeshift camp, taking food from the manor and what we catch. By day the woods will bear wooden fruit for furniture. New pews at St. Botolph Church are needed, and the surrounding landowner cottages need rustic stools and shelving. We will stack fuel for next winter, coppice, and tend to the health of the forest." "Bless you, foresters, and may you stay in health." The horse was complacent and at home with his caretakers, 2 merry, wise, and hard-working peasants with purpose. They stepped away at an even pace, both methodical and pure. In the distance Chad hears the fast clopping of hoofs rounding the bend, but decides to remain discreet. It's not a workman's cart, he senses. Intuitively he knows it's a special traveller in a hurry for some unknown purpose. The black carriage approaches quickly. Its sides are sprayed with mud, but the interior glows with rich red velvet, probably from India. The dark bay horse dons a red ostrich plume between its ears, and the driver is set high above in a dark suit and top hat. It's no local chassis that he observes. As they slow to a walk, he shields himself from view behind the shelter of leaves. Inside he peers a fine lady, bedazzled in silk frocks, with hat and veil to disguise her features. What lady of value is this travelling the back paths to avoid the main roads? Chad says. Beside her he glimpses her companion, a short and sturdy dwarf with a pug nose and prominent ears. He resembles a variety of animals combined into a troll-like appearance. It is no lady, but a woman on an entertaining exhibition for a large payment in return. Chad has heard of such ladies, but kept securely in London style and pomp, yet hidden behind the underbelly of society, wheeled out for pleasures. The dwarf accompanies her in lust and reward. Not only does he see her safely through, and affords a bit of company, but his own desire ensures she can perform with finesse and enjoyment. Surely they must be heading to Red Pitt's Manor, where the Lord of the Region's brick-making awaits an evening of carousing. The passing carriage clearly upsets Chad. The marauding laugh of the woman and her dwarf are unclean to his ears. Quickly he resumes his journey in the opposite direction, towards Bick's Bottom. It is for reasons like this, greed and shallow ways of making a living by debauchery, that have set me on my own hermit-like course to observe and define knowledge and wisdom on this earth, Chad tells himself. For a stretch he feels lonely and perplexed, but strides forward in hopes of meeting a kind kindred spirit. In the distance he sights the 5th century church at Bick's, already standing several centuries. The steeple points upwards and leads the eye to the surrounding hills, carpeted with trees that shimmer against a quiet blue sky. Chad will rest at the church for a while, and decide whether to take the high and more isolated track home, or the low road Knightsbridge, that is busy, full of wayfaring people and wagons, moving north towards Oxford and south to Henley-on-Thames, where the River Thames brings goods from London. Chad ventures into St. James's Church, which, though vacated, exudes the presence of many who worship, and prayers linger in the air. The walls are caked with the rise of silent emotions over time. In silence he closes his eyes, and becomes one with the tree trunks and leafy arms held out in a swirling dance around the valley. He breathes the musty smell of the stone blocks, cut ages ago, and formed into a small church for 8 to 12 worshippers to congeal. The altar sits below the round window, near the eaves, and its smoothness soothes Chad. The hands that have rested there, cupping forth to receive a holy blessing, left impression on the granite bowl, and stand. He stands and takes leave. At the entrance he dips his fingers into the purified and blessed water the priest has impregnated with holy thoughts and higher faith. Chad has studied the bountiful ways of water and their different attributes since childhood. He can sense the serenity of the molecules, and its density and thoughts that have been laid upon it. Outside he pauses, and proceeds along the low road. Soon Chad spies the jaunty gait of a pedlar, laden with fawn-coloured knapsack and pots and pans and implements jostling around his outside. He is small and sprightly, dressed to match his bag in light brown linen trousers and a collarless shirt. His boots are well worn, yet sturdy and comfortable by the way he moves. They meet by a large boulder, and lean on its edge to share words and bide a traveller's tale. Alex the pedlar. I've been up and down the country twice this year. I walk and I walk. My home is these boots. Each season casts a different glow on the land, as different as the people I meet. Some folks are shy and retreat. They hide away from life most of the time, busying themselves with their animals and chores. I've met so many that rarely ever speak to others as the day passes in their life. They're just shy. Each day I can cover 15 miles if I have to. I generally follow the same route, because I have to purchase new goods along the way. I go to Oxford, Birmingham, Sheffield, York, Newcastle. In between I wander the hills and the dales. I cater for the folk who don't travel too much. People, though they're all different, for the most part good. I've never been robbed, but I know what to watch out for, you see. By nightfall I'll be in Wallingford outside of the castle, calling on the winding streets that skirt the river. For them I'll sell my best London cloths. In time, Alex unpacks the organized series of cloths and compartments containing his wares. He not only provides for the kitchen, but gardener's essentials, including vegetable seeds, small trowels and hose, needles and threads, bobbins, pincushions, and an array of fabrics also emerge. Various dried herbs and medicines and trinkets for luck, along with copper bracelets, pendants, and other jewellery, are coughed up along with children's toys, and sugar sweets, cups, saucers, bowls, and cutlery are rolled out, along with the mop heads, leather belts, pouches, and even a duck feather pillow for his wealthier clients. He grins, and Chad passes his eye over his riches, the vast weight and variety he's able to flounce. He does well, and he's able. His tongue is full of news about floods and harvests, disruptions and sickness. Chad picks out a leather pouch and fills it with sweeties for the children of Peschel Venables, and after their exchange they part by walking backwards, bidding good-bye and farewell to each other. "I'll see you in the autumn, shall I?" "Yes, I'll stop if you like, Chad." "Oh, please do, and look out for new seeds along the way." At the junction Chad turned left up the Stoner Valley. The road was wide, though rough and rutted. Chad knew the road since he had arrived from Westminster Abbey in London. He soon learnt to count the grand old oaks that lined the road as markers for directions and reference. On a moonlight night the owls sweep down from above, splaying their fringe of feathers across the sky. But today it was bright and crisp, with stillness in the air, despite the many carts and village folks straying back from the towns in dusty commotion. The business of work, carts carrying logs, wheat, corn, barrels, stone, and brick, creak under the weight, jostling to and fro between the ruts, now dry and corroded from the winter mud. Flies buzz around the horses' ears, and they shake and swish their tails back and forth. Although kindly faces show through the dust, the day is hurried, and most shelter their spirits under hats and stride ahead. Chad takes a short cut up Ormscombe Lane to the ridge of trees, nestling in a finer way. The day is nearly spent. Chad looks forward to settling down and whittling away beech branches into a hurdle pan. But there is one last vantage point before he arrives home, where a vast expanse lays before him for miles of views on a clear day, so far that he can glimpse sections of the wandering river to Windsor. The whole valley flows away from this spot, whilst the tide of travellers move like ants up its thoroughfare, Knightsbridge Road. "Look up at the hill. That was once the secret fort of King Cymbeline, at the time Christ was alive," said Chad to himself. Chad's home is not far. He just has to cross the crown of the hill and mount the other side of another ravine in the beech woods. His huts are nestled on the hillside, with the umbrella of the trees screening the rain and towering above, creating a filtered green canopy of light that contains the spirit of all living creatures in the woods from evaporating away. He sits and is peaceful. In a few hours' time he must make his way back to the village across Maiden's Grove, and see several others in the parish, tending their illnesses and complaints. His home is sheltered from view, and only a handful of people know its exact location. Robert Doyle allowed Chad access to all his lands, totaling several thousand acres, and in return for priestly and overseeing responsibilities, Chad lives freely in his woods. The Doyle family knows his talents as a priest, learned alchemist, and naturalist. He provides them spiritual protection in the most western part of the Chiltern Hills. Chad constructed several small huts, none of which allowed him standing room. His sleeping hut is woven of wattle with a sawdust floor, covered with several cowhides and various furs to keep him warm in the deepest winter's night. He dug a trench around the hut to divert and contain any water runoff that might seep into his living quarters. Another hut he uses for cooking and storing tools. A hole in the roof emits smoke from the room, yet ingeniously capped through a separate support to keep the rain at bay. Several other huts store firewood, water, collection containers, and clothing. His most valuable possessions are strategically buried or hung from trees within the woods. He takes an interest in most learned matters. His great interest is water, and he travels far to various holy and healing wells to collect samples for both scientific study and to dispense remedies for various complaints. A collection of over 50 water types is stored in glass vials and bulbs, blown from various glass blowers he's known. A leather thong is wrapped around each vial, and each is labelled and stored deep in the woods under various conditions and temperatures depending on where they were found and to what purpose they'll be used. Some of the water samples are best stored in sunlight to take advantage of the oxygen-creating atmosphere, and others are dug deep into the soil to maintain their fragile molecules. In the winter, all are placed below ground and covered with pine boughs to prevent freezing. Chad is well respected for his water cures, and also holds of the responsibility for testing local well water and the quality running in the streams and ponds throughout the valley. If an animal decomposes in a stream, much illness could result. Chad has to locate the body and ensure all drinking water is kept pure. He stays abreast of the latest technology and scientific thought. His travels take him through many villages, and he observes the crafts and means used, noting engineering advancements, which he relays to Robert Doyle and other respected artisans and peers. The larder is kept in the trees. He also built his own tree house, a useful retreat and lookout. Steps are built onto an oak's trunk, but are cleverly hidden from sight by leaves and vines. The house is lodged much higher in the tree, and out of view during both winter and summer. If need be, it could hide him for days. The house measures 6 foot by 6 foot, with small windows in all directions. On the bare wooden planks, Chad placed hessian and jute bags from a nearby flour mill to form a soft carpet. He also has a small lift, so to carry provisions upwards using a pulley and a rope. Another rope is for an emergency. It's attached to a branch and enables him to make a very fast retreat if he needs to abandon the tree perch. Times are dangerous, and his knowledge is a powerful tool, evoking much jealousy in some circles. The Doyle Manor house was less than half a mile away from Chad's huts. Robert Doyle was the mayor of Oxford, and owned land throughout the county. He also was Norman in birth. Chad was useful to him, his knowledge, travelling ways, protective spirit, and religious background. If Doyle was away, Chad took charge. He fostered the small community of 15 adult residents at Peschel and Venables. They were company and home for him. He was a doctor, a priest, engineer, and scientist combined, but his situation also left him space to travel to nearby hamlets or villages, and even further afield. His days were often his own, free to explore the woods or call in the neighbouring blacksmiths, flour mills, and other tradesmen. The undulating folds of the hills left each section of ground unique. Although Chad lived in the gently sloping northeasterly hill, the terrain's complexion varied from the stubble left from the wheat field to pasture for sheep and cornfields. Towards Peschel only peas were worth raising, and hence Peschel was the Anglo-Saxon name, meaning pea hill. Chad ate his main meal at the Doyle Manor house. He only had to cut across the slope of the hill, down through a steep beechwood, and up through a rough pasture. It was past high noon, and he readied himself for the sermon at their licensed chapel. and the chance of seeing Eva, the dairymaid and cook. As he lengthened his stride up the last hill, he saw her, standing in wait for him. She wore a long, dark tunic with square collar that reached below her calves. She wore a white linen bib over it, and a cloth belt tied round her middle. Her feet were clad in high, soft leather boots. A blue scarf was tied gently over her head, forming a cap. She was slender and medium height. She was in her mid-20s. For a second the world stood still, and the colours surrounding her froze. The greens, pale to vibrant and deep, the sharp white clouds against the blue sky, and yellow dandelions, and the soft wind circling her figure. She was waiting for him, he thought. His heart raced and blood pumped harder. "Good day, Eva. I see you're taking a bit of sunshine." "Yes, the kitchen's been a bit warm with all the cooking. Besides, I've come out to warn you of our guests. A king's forester has stopped to demand a meal. He's quite unsavoury, and you best beware. He's looking for something to stir." They walked along the path lined with yew and pine towards the flint and brick house. He would have to be on his guard with the stranger, as well as in tune with his senses, to determine the forester's wishes. But they had only a few minutes before Chad said graces. He usually helped Eva in the hen-house, collecting eggs and checking each hen's health. He felt her light presence, clean, sculpted face with clear eyes and high cheekbones. Ringlets of dark hair peeped out from under her cap, but she was engrossed with her duties, and unawares of Chad's admiring glances. "Could I show you the cheese, Chad?" They descended into the cellar of the dairy where cheese rounds matured, and Chad sampled several rounds at various ages. His years in the monastery had taught him a great deal about cheese-making, and the food and spices in general. He developed the subtle taste to determine flavours. Several of the rounds tasted quite harsh. The bacteria or culture are often unpredictable. The cow only has to have an off day, and her milk turns the curds sour. Part of Chad's duties was to sort the cheeses. The lesser quality were taken to Watlington Market and sold mostly to the poor, but much of the cheese was excellent. The cellar temperature and moisture was constant, and the recipes were directly from Westminster Abbey. Chad had the skills of a cheesemaker, and Eva had the touch with the cows. They loved her, and she not only carefully tended to their dietary needs, rotating the pasture and adding herbs to the fields, but also kept them clean and carefully bedded on clean straw in the barn each night. The 6 cows followed Eva, single file, wherever she willed them to walk. Any thought of a private conversation with Eva today was out of the question. The two entered the house, Eva as domestic servant, preparer, and server of the meal, roast lamb with carrots, peas, and the lovely malted bread she baked. Chad entered with the solemn duty of purging ill spirits from its inhabitants and imparting benevolent thoughts upon their souls. Chad was comfortable with Richard Doyle, lord of both Peschel, Napier, and Venables, less than a mile away. He was interested in learned activities, a fair and honest man who took his responsibilities and commitments seriously. His wife Christine was open and warm. She and Eva were friends. It wasn't just a master and servant. Eva combined helping with their 2 children with all her domestic chores. The large square table in the dining hall was made from the beech forest. Though plain and naturally coloured, it was polished off nicely with clean linen cloths on top. Earthenware and pottery plates were set around it, and wooden bowls and pewter platters of meat were placed on its centre. A large fire burnt brightly in the large inglenook fireplace behind the chairs, made from local wood as well. The population of the lands in this region was sparse, and only glitches of people were tucked into the valley's folds. There was plenty of space, and wildlife for all. Alongside close-knitted clusters of people, John, Mary, Zach, Marigold, Harvey, Maria, and Tom, and Rebecca lived at Venables with 6 children, aged between 2 and 14. In a sense, they worked as a complete unit and extended family. They played that way as well. Ale was brewed in bulk, and they all had free access to as much as they wanted after sundown. Starting with May Day, they also took to dancing late into the evenings under the moonlight around the large vegetable garden in front of their homes. Musical instruments were crude and hard to find, but John, the oldest at 42, made 2 drums out of wood and pig's hide. A few wooden whistles and pipes were whittled, and wooden blocks, cymbals, bells, and a lyre completed the musical arrangement. The vegetable garden was often the central congregation point. It measured about 20 metres by 40 metres, and perhaps the merrymaking contributed to its bountiful produce. The barn was to the east of the houses, and an acre of pea sticks and 20 acres of arable fields fanned outwards into the surround. The pea sticks rose almost shoulder height and bordered the vegetables, and the furrowed rows of ploughed fields contoured around the peas. It created a view of enormous colour and texture. At midsummer the fruits of labour were as varied as its inhabitants. Marigold's fox-red hair and tall frame contrasted with Rebecca, who was pasty, fat, and very short. Her dishwater blonde hair was cut short. Mary was the older, and her silver hair was offset by smooth, golden tan skin. Sue was well-proportioned and elegantly poised with wisdom and herbal knowledge. Mary usually delivered most of the babies in the area. Rebecca was the youngest at just 17. Her dark hair fell below her shoulders, and her long arms and legs were always swinging in a lanky symmetry. Though each couple had their own cottage, all cooking was done communally for efficiency. Bread, rabbits, vegetables, potatoes, and meat were shared between families. Sometimes they would cook together, but often each family prepared their own meals, and although they commingled, they went about their independent ways too. As it was Saturday night and nearly dusk, Chad was in a hurry to settle his affairs for the evening. The villagers were keen to begin their party. It was the first truly warm day of spring, and Sunday would be a day of rest. By the time Chad had reached Peschel Napier, Doyle had retired to his study. He had given up any chance to discuss his wish to wed Eva. He paced up and down, wondering when he could possibly broach the subject with him. Suddenly Christine emerged from the back door and beckoned him. "Chad, what are you doing? Is something bothering you?" "Oh, Christine, you caught me by surprise. It's just that I'd like to have a word with Richard, but he's deep into work now, I suppose." Chad caught a sparkle in Christine's eye, and for a second it held his gaze with a flash of mutual understanding. "I'd be happy to see if he's available. It would not be a problem." "Well, if you think he wouldn't mind." "No, of course not. In fact, I think he was hoping to have a word with you." Richard appeared at the door and waved Chad in. "Please come in. I'm glad you've stopped by and grateful you were able to dispose of the royal forester. What a nuisance. Please come in, and we'll go to the study and talk." Chad followed Richard along the flagstone hallway that led to the back room. Inside was a rough table and chairs. The walls were covered with shelves, and several heavy parchment papers were strewn across his desk. 2 candles lit the room with a warm golden hue, and the window was flung open, letting the mild evening's breeze filter through. The evening's dark blue sky and stars were enchanting, and Chad surmised it was the time to discuss things openly. "What do you have on your mind, Chad? What brings you back so late?" "Oh, good sir, I have an important personal matter to discuss with you. I find such matters difficult, but I must consult your advice. You see, dear lord, my heart has taken to a certain person, and I wish to resolve the situation. I have lived alone for many years, and yet I long for a normal family life as a man. Certainly, it's a desire of all of us. And whom, may I ask, is the source of your affections? I want no difficulty for anyone concerned, if it is not to be. I only need to know where I stand, what is right and clear. Can I trust that my fancies will in no way offend this household? Of course, I have trusted you implicitly. Now it is your turn, and I am honoured you have come to me. Thank you, sire. It is Eva. She is the light of my life. Every time we are near, my heart beats with joy, and she brings glee to my soul. But how can a priestly hermit of my existence hope to offer her a life? And what if her feelings are not returned, and the chaos is disruptive? I don't think I could bear to live near her if she chooses not to reciprocate. Richard Doyle leant back in his wooden chair and chuckled. He wrings his hands together, and the creases form a smile. From upwards on his face, his grin beams with amusement and relief. Chad, I have wondered for months if this was true. I was certain there was something between you, and I felt it in her as well. Worry not, for I will consult Christine and get her advice on the matter without Eva ever knowing. And if the feelings are reciprocated, which I can assure you they will be, we can plan for the day. But, sir, I haven't a proper house, and only a pauper's hut that's unfit for any man's wife. Yes, that I understand, Chad, and there is no reason we can't find you better accommodation besides. Do not worry. I am your friend, and value your company and wisdom. I am pleased that you love Eva, and trust me much good will come of it. We will do all that we can to accommodate a new couple. The end of the large storage house can be converted and made ready. Eva need not continue her duties within this house. She is free to become your wife. Tears welled up in Chad's eyes. After all, the anxiety of firstly facing his feelings towards Eva, and the long months he endured thinking of whether such a love in his life was practical and possible, he nearly broke with relief at such good news. Doyle looked reassuringly at Chad. Then, before he makes leave, Doyle broached his own subject. Chad, I wonder if I can ask you to listen to a small problem I have. It concerns the ship, August Fame, that I've owned for several years now. Yes, of course. Is it in London now, is it not? Yes, it is, but the ship has been losing money badly. I know something's amiss. She travels to the Spice Islands twice a year via France with wool cloth for export, and the items she returns with are much more lucrative than any in this country. Pepper sells for 10 times its cost. Cinnamon and cloves also bring a fortune for the court and its kitchens, besides the best Gascony and Bordeaux wines. But the captain always encounters some misfortune, or has some excuse for its heavy losses. I'm at my wit's end. If what I suspect is true, that Captain James is a rogue and milking me dry, then I'm in great danger of further losses. But I cannot just dismiss him, or we'd run the risk he'd burn the ship entirely, and set his men upon the goods. Besides, what relationship does he have with the suppliers? I must proceed carefully, and determine exactly what's happening. It sounds a delicate situation, and dangerous as well. If you condone the affair, greater losses will follow, but his removal must be by the authorities once evidence is gathered. He must be jailed if his crimes are rife, and never allowed to make mockery again. But how do I put this plan into motion? I'll think clearly about it some more. Maybe Brother Paul at the Abbey can help. He's in charge of procuring all of the kitchen foodstuffs at Westminster Abbey. I've been meaning to pay him a visit, and both his knowledge of the victual trades could prove insightful. I could either despatch word to him tomorrow, or go there myself if you wish." "Thank you, Chad. I think your idea is worthy. Let's both sleep on it. But most important is your matter to resolve. Come to me by midday tomorrow, and I'll have a word from Christine, and some news for you. Do not worry. The predicament will be but short-lived. Rest well, and fret not." Chad woke with anxious expectation. A slight covering of frost cast a nip in the air, but already the rays of bright warm sunshine penetrated the forest with a hopeful foreboding. He lit his fire with tinder-box and flint. This morning he would be extra kind to himself, and he hurried to prepare his morning gruel to warm the sharpness in his belly. The dawn woke the forest slowly. The rooks fumbled in their nests and stretched and fluffed their feathered wings. Activity began, and they soon made fleeting visits to neighbouring branches, asserting the beginning of the day. Other creatures stirred, if only to an imperceptible rustle in the bushes, not unlike a breeze hitting against leaves. The owl's call had dimmed, and many, like the badger, had taken to burrows after a long night's hunting. Chad walked to the dew-pond several hundred yards away. He quietly bent and peered at his reflection, calmly washing away sleep and refreshing his face, hands, and arms. Several pairs of ducks silently glided across the silver surface, nipping at tadpoles that darted below. Soft rings melodiously circled them like musical notes, reverberating across the water. His reflection picked up the contours of his face, the large eyes like pools themselves, high broad cheekbones, and a fine nose. His hair was cut short with a fringe across his brow. He wet the wooden comb in his pocket and carefully swept it through each strand, which he dried with a cloth. To-day he must look his best, but his thoughts also settled on what plans he would make if all did not go well. He knew he would attend to Doyley's shipping business in London and investigate his concerns over the trade losses. He wanted to spend time with Friar Paul at the Abbey and learn more about the new flavourings garnishing food and new herbs and fruits in the garden. He also wanted to explore London's crafts and visit the multitude of trades down the winding lanes that twisted and curved around the dense hum of activity. He would stay away longer if need be. He wanted to see what new goods arrived Southwark daily, and new faces of people to meet. He wanted to walk across Tower Bridge, hear the noise, take in the smells, see the colourful placard signs, and watch the mighty Thames activity. The sun's rays filtered through a cloudless sky, and he felt peaceful approaching this telling time. He walked softly and breathed in the fresh air. He went directly past Doyley's window, and he gestured for him to come in. There was a grim silence and quiet that permeated the house. At last he would know. "Sit down, Chad. Would you like something to drink? I won't prolong your distress. Christine has had a word with Eva, nothing too deep, just a few queries to see how the grand lies." Doyley's face broke, and a large grin spread from ear to ear. It was just a twinkle of truth that Christine gleaned. No feelings were intruded upon, just a simple recognition between women of feelings that lie beneath. "It is best that you approach Eva yourself. She can only say no. She is milking now, and soon to make cheese. Go to her, and good luck." Chad went directly into the barn, where Eva was struggling to get hold of one of the ewes. There had been a struggle, and straw and hair was flying in her attempts to grab the sheep. "Blast! The older ones are always the worst. I've been chasing her for hours. I catch her and begin, and then she squirms away." Chad moved a bale of hay near where the sheep stood. He cornered her and quietly moved to get hold of her. Instead, he was sent plummeting to the ground, but kept his wrestler's grip around the sheep's neck. Together they rolled around. The straw were soon covered with golden fibrous strands. Eva struggled to help pin the animal and gain control, but the struggling legs that thrashed about knocked her down. All three lay helpless upon the barn floor, and it wasn't long before Chad erupted into laughter and Eva began giggling. They looked at each other, deep in the barn's bedding, and the eyes shone a truth. Quickly and nervously Eva rose to stand, but Chad remained, gripping the sheep, perhaps for comfort. "Will you marry me, Eva? I've spoken to Richard Doyle, and either way he will stand behind us. If you're not inclined, there will be no problems. It is just that I love you, Eva." Eva stood back, and as the sun's rays filtered through the dust raised by the commotion, she caught her breath and felt a startling spark of glory. It was as if time stopped in a moment of pure bliss. He loves me, and for all this time I have wondered and laid awake at night thinking of Chad and how deep his feelings lay. Now his love stands before me. It is true, he loves me also. Chad stood and brushed the straw away. Eva still stood as if struck by a thunderbolt and unable to speak. His gaze shifted to her face. She finally turned to face him, and she walked slowly into his open arms. Trade and Westminster. Chad readied himself for the voyage to London. Richard Doyle sat down and gave him much of the details necessary for Chad's investigation. Records of the galley were carefully scrutinized, both for its contents and specifications. Crew member names were noted, and the history of its voyages were carefully recorded. Richard also gave him directions and locations of people who might assist. They discussed the options and how to proceed. Several pigeons were picked for their speediness and reliable message service. All was arranged, and Chad would leave early in the morning to catch the first barge from Henley-on-Thames. That night, as he returned to his hut and fell into bed, his heart was never so uplifted, and his soul never so triumphantly peaceful, and sure that much good would come in his life. His consciousness oozed into the forest, wafting notes of happiness and thanksgiving throughout the woods. He rose in silence, and in the dark velvet of early morning he headed down the hill to Pattermore Lane to begin the London journey. Suddenly he heard the rustle of leaves and a thumping from the forest floor. He heard a horse approaching, its snorting breath through the forest. It was Eva, riding Sophie. The grey mare was edgy with anticipation, obedient, but nervous. "Eva, for heaven's sake, what are you doing here?" "I've come to ride with you towards Henley-on-Thames. I'll see you off through the woods." "Let's take the quieter route." Silently they turned back up the hill and soon approached Greenaway, which descended to Wormscombe Way, and thus avoiding the heavily travelled Knightsbridge road into Henley-on-Thames. Together they walked in a peaceful silence as the sun began rising amongst pink-streaked sky. The rustle of the leaves upon the trail and breeze, blowing quietly through the forest, filled their ears with a pleasant warmness. No words were needed. Two hearts cupped together, and in the awakening darkness they strode forwards. Sophie was a special mare. The luminescence shone through her pure white fur, and dark, large eyes were alive. She was descended from a line of war horses on the continent, bred for their loyalty and stamina. Eva rode her often through the woods, and Sophie was generous and always well-mannered. She snorted as she pranced down the chalk trail. Her face was an exquisite carving, with a flat Roman nose, her neck arched forward, and long pure white tail swung back and forth in a beautiful rhythm with her steps. It was a farewell ride. It was a bidding until Chad's return, and the future that would unfold between them together. At St. James's Church, where Chad had happened upon the pedlar, they stopped before parting. Eva dismounted Sophie, and Chad took her hand. They sat on a rock and embraced. "I won't be long, Eva, and I'll send word weekly with the pigeons. If you need me for any reason, I'll be at the Abbey at Westminster with Brother Paul. Listen for my thoughts of you at night. Know that I love you with all my heart." Eva smiled her special smile, and as their palms touched for the last time, she mounted, and they gazed across to each other. She turned Sophie to retrace her steps. Chad picked up his belongings, and the cooing pigeons waking in their nested cage. He slowly walked down the opposite path. Occasionally, as the distance between them expanded, they both looked back, to glimpse the last bit of cloth and colour, until only Sophie's hoofs could be heard and the rustling sound of leaves parting the way along Greenaway. Henley-on-Thames was crowded this morning as dusk broke. The blackened greys of early morning had still not broken into the full colours of the day. Carts creaked and groaned as they carried wheat to the barges soon to leave for London. Pulleys and hoists swayed near the lofts, where much grain was stored until shipment. Women carried baskets full of eggs to the dockside. Activity went back and forward as the vessel was loaded. The barge was nearly ready, and Chad made his way forward and climbed aboard to begin the scenic, slow rhythm of the waterway. He found shelter below with the boatsmen, amongst the winding curls of rope. There he watched the duck silently gliding around the entire bustle, and the occasional swan elegantly paddling downstream. Earl, the boatsman, was dark-haired and lean. He was tall, with a lined, weathered face, and pipe hanging from his mouth. He busily made the final adjustments and arrangements, ensuring all was properly covered and tied down for the final descent down the river. His assistant made last-minute adjustments to the rudder and emergency rope systems. The boat smelled heavily of tar from its outside. At last they were ready and took to the middle of the river. For that first moment that the current thrust them into motion, and the banks were soon out of reach, nostalgia overcame Chad. He looked back to the docks they were swiftly departing from, and all the mild activities still being carried on, unaware and uncaring of their departure, their lives carried on. His eyes drifted to the tree ridges, the direction of the pathway home, to the brick and wooden town, worn, melodious, forever creaking with loads coming in and out. The alehouse windows facing the river were thrust out, and welcomed the warm springtime breeze, the swelter of people around the market-place, selling and buying cabbages, milk, and so much of daily life. He never belonged to Henley-on-Thames, but he did to its surrounding hills and valleys. Departure always made him reminisce his past. Instead, the river took them swiftly, and the life of the water itself was an unfamiliar personality that rippled and waved with gashing breaths. I could have taken the road to London, by cart or walking, but the river is something new, and I wanted to see the banks on the Thames. Perched near the bow, he let the stiff winds rake through his hair and sting his cheek, anxious for the last good-bye to pass his longing breast. Drifting down the Thames to London meant assistance from the shore was unnecessary, though still much effort was needed to navigate the whims of its cascading current. "Medmenham is just ahead, and people are always clustered around the landing," said Earl. "Many woodsmen carry sticks upon their backs for miles with them, tightly bound and strapped. The women, with cloth bonnets and aprons, wash along the shore, and let the children play behind them. Everyone comes to the well to replenish buckets for household chairs. Dairying is big in this stretch, and the cows get herded daily to the fields." A small mill-wheel churned the river into its paddles, and each rotation of the large oak driving beam was met by a resounding, thudding crash. Though he couldn't see inside the mill, he envisaged a multitude of wheels and wooden posts, driving the machinery and stones to crush the grain. He imagined the miller, deep in swift concentration, running to check the bins and hoppers, as well as the fineness of the flour and bran that poured down after processing. It was a dangerous business, harnessing the river's power and understanding its behavior. It wasn't that Chad was quiet. He was consumed with the swiftly moving sights surrounding him. Besides, the boatsmen were busy staying on course and contemplating the high and rapidly moving river. Life seemed to rise before him, and the pleasurable detachment seemed unreal. People waved and occasionally stopped to watch the vessel passing through their lives to places they had never ventured. The smoke from the small cottages filtered through the hillsides. The mooing of cows and squealing of pigs were punctuated by the gaggle of geese and crowing of chickens. It was a whole other world, and yet so distant from his own. This is Marlow Bridge. It's a large town and a bit higgledy-piggledy. The milkmaids and their yokes carrying pails of fresh milk into the town's inns and public houses. Most wood gets carried by cart. There's lots of horses and lots of wealth. Few boys fished off the water's edge, dangling their toes in the cool of the current. It was early yet, and Chad had already seen a day's sights. He silently crept below and curled into a ball near his pigeons. There he slept for a good few hours. Chad awakened to the sounds and smells of Earl lighting the small stove down below. The sun was nearly overhead, and the river had calmed. "Would you like a warm cup of broth and chunk of bread and cheese? We won't reach Westminster until nightfall." Luckily Earl is unperturbed and at ease with himself and the surroundings. He has a kindly, impish grin, and his eyebrows are heavy and thick. When he speaks they rise like two triangles, and his brow furrows. He offers Chad a cup of broth, and Chad reciprocates with a wedge of the best cheese from Doyley's cellar, and bread made yesterday by Eva. Although sharp and tangy, the cheese has a smooth, creamy aftertaste. The bread is coarse, a mixture of rye and oats, blended with bran and chopped hazelnuts. The broth is from chicken stock, and pieces of peas and carrots slide down Chad's throat with warming effect. Earl remains outside, steering the rudder and keeping watch for fast-moving current and branches that might snare the vessel. The barge measures 50 feet by 10 feet. It is flat, though a lip protrudes along the edge, some 18 inches. An unused mast sits in the centre, or much calmer days when the river threatens not to move at all. "How long have you sailed, Earl?" "Nearly 30 years now. I come from London and the docks of Southwark. My father was a rope maker, and I grew up surrounded by water. The boat is my home as well." Chad glances around the vessel and notes a further room down in the hall, with a bed and solid table surrounded by benches built into the woodwork. Candle holders are mounted on the sides, and clothes stick from pegs. A tick made from linen and stuffed with straw is for bedding. "Earl, what accommodation do you recommend in Southwark or Billingsgate?" "Ah, the Merry Widow is convenient, and close to Tower Bridge, for easy access. This is Southwark now. I've never seen so many sized baskets and goods. The quay is chaos. How do you keep track?" "Every ship must clear the weighbridge, and then the Government Import Division. Trade of each vessel is important, not only for tax purposes, but we need to know where trade is happening and what goods. The country depends on exporting wool cloth, and although the country is over 2.5 million peoples now, if it weren't for the wool, wealth would soon dry up. London population is about 30,000 people, and it provides services based on the shipping trade and the government at Westminster. Do you happen to know the captain of August Flame, and where I might find the ship?" Not personally. All captains are tough-minded and interested in booty and their pockets, but they're paid fair and square, based on percentages agreed in ship-owner contracts. It doesn't pay them to cheat. At least the seasoned traders see things that way. The government monitors all goods coming in. The crew can take liberties, but the captain has to establish order and discipline. Usually a good ship has professional dealings at the other end. Right, there you are. I've got to get loaded from the opposite side now, and get back to Henley-on-Thames in the morning. I wish you luck, Chad, and if you're travelling back, just ask for my whereabouts with the dockmaster at Billingsgate. Westminster Bank of Richard Doyle, Day 2. Gerald Turner, please. Chad Branscombe here to see the August Flame accounts. Mr. Doyle wrote to him that I'd be coming. Come right in. I think he stepped out, but he should be back shortly, said the bank manager. In the meantime, could I look at the account ledgers, please, over the past 3 years? No, let's wait for Mr. Turner. He told me this morning he would handle this personally. An hour later, Chad is still waiting. Do you know where your employee is, sir? I don't know why he's not back. Do you wish to come back tomorrow? It's late afternoon, and you'll have more time then. Well, I would wait, but what you suggest is reasonable. I will see you first thing tomorrow. Southwark at night. Night-time is the best time to see Southwark. Just as the sun sets and the brazier fires are lit at each corner tavern, and the flame torches illuminate the quays, Chad sets out down Pudding Lane towards the river bank, in hopes of catching sight of any evening activity on the August Flame. If anything illicit is going on, it will happen at night. There was a peaceful serenity that permeated the still air. It was sweet, and Chad knew it was from the sleeping souls taking nourishment on another sphere. Only cats and bakers busied themselves at this time. He took notice of all the shops and buildings within the area, and stockpiled his images and information in the far part of his mind. He wandered along the edge of the Thames, noting the names of shops, eateries, and pubs. He thought of his cover and what character he would play to infiltrate the corruption. There were 4 main piers at Southwark, and he strolled along each, picking up the individual sounds and atmospheres as he passed by. Several vessels were meticulously kept. Their sails were clean and carefully rolled. Their decks were washed and sanded. Other ships were dirty, and they stank. A few bottles stood on the deck, and an uneasy atmosphere wafted from below. He kept his observations purposeful and objective, in hopes of reaching initial conclusions about August Flame. Many sailors would be sleeping on board and easily woken, being used to disturbed sleep patterns and rotating night shifts at sea. August Flame was docked at the next pier, and Chad observed her from the distance. A warm, fiery light filled the cabin window at the water's level. Someone was working hard into the night. She was one of the largest vessels in port, and appeared well tended and seaworthy. She was the only vessel not sleeping, and it was clear that crates were being moved from the vessel this late at night. It was clearly suspicious. Chad left the dockyard to avoid being seen. Chad made his way to a sailor's pub called the Merry Widow. He hadn't been in a pub for at least a year and a half, and after a long sleepless night it was good to sit down and listen to tales and travels from afar. It was a crude establishment, so he didn't expect much grace or cheer, but it offered a beginning into the ways of mercantile shipping. A pint of ale sat before him in a cracked clay cylinder. Wooden tables and stools sat upon an earthen floor. The large fireplace was now cold and draughty, and the smell of coal mingled with beer on earth, on more beer in earth. Smoke from the evening before still swirled around the building's internal posts, as the morning light of the day penetrated the windows and the hazy, drunken night. "Good evening to you, my weary traveller. Where do you come from?" "I've just come from Norfolk, where I farm, and my family have farmed for generations, and I always come for Westminster's annual fair. I'm always interested in the new buildings and people popping up. Westminster only started as a small town with a manor over 200 years ago. I gather then there was only a scattering of small farms and a handful of substantial houses. Today, I've heard the population in Westminster totals 3,000. Still, though, Westminster is still under the control of the cloth and fur dealers." "Yes, I grew up at the Westminster Abbey, and life always revolved around the royal household and the Abbey's needs. There are now at least 50 ale-houses in the area, and shopkeepers and craftsmen are free from city taxes and guild restrictions due to Westminster's sanctuary status. Flemish and German tailors, cobblers, hatters, metalworkers, spectacle makers, and many dealers in gold, cloth, clothes, groceries, and other high-value goods reside in Westminster. Now over 60 monks live at the Abbey, who is the landlord to nearly 2/3 of Westminster proper. In 1066 William I's coronation took place in Westminster. The Normans are still quite dominant. Believe me when I tell you that the royal treasure is stored there, and the exchequer. The government no longer follows the king round on his constant journeys. Westminster became home to government. Now I hear Henry III is spending a fortune, £50,000, to demolish and rebuild the Abbey. London is full of variety and affluence. All these new merchant and trade guilds are growing powerful. The victualling guilds, which concern me and our farming, consist of the pepperers, the grocers, vintners, fishmongers, cornmongers, of which I'm a member. Our country thrives on imported Gascony wine in return for English wheat and wool, and now the Baltic trade, controlled by the Hanseatic German merchants, have North European trade all sewed up with their ability to access the East. Oh, yes, but the rich want their furs, and the latest are Russian squirrel and sable. The cloth guilds, and especially the mercers, drapers, tailors, haberdashers, are equally wealthy and powerful. Our wool goes to Flanders to be woven into cloth, but now the Italians are entering cloth also. Westminster Abbey Herb Garden. At the break of dawn Chad walked towards Westminster, at least a mile from London itself. Swirling blankets of fog rose from the water, and the bank was invisible. It was so bad that Chad was lucky to see 10 feet in front of him. A nippy frost hung in the air, and it was this kind of weather that made people bitterly unfriendly and sharply reserved. "Hello, my friend! Chad, I haven't seen you for several years now. What brings you to us again?" said Brother Paul of Westminster Abbey. "How is your life near Henley-on-Thames?" "So wonderful to see you, Brother Paul, your joyous face once again, Paul. I hope your herb gardens are expanding, and I'm interested in any new herbs you've planted. I hear you're now in charge of the Abbey's food procurement. Do you buy from the vessel August Flame?" "Well, we take all its wine from Gascony and Bordeaux, and in fact our arrangement with the captain entitles us to the full weight of all the goods it carries into port. I can get you the tonnage and the detailed items. A guarantee he's paid for the entire shipload. Go to the shipping office to get the list of what goods arrive. It's independently recorded. It's mostly walnuts, dates, pepper, fine cinnamons too. You can then compare it to our records." "How does payment get made?" "We pay 80% to the bank of Richard Doyle in Westminster every quarter, and 20% goes to the captain. It's of no interest to us how he pays his crew, but we pay the captain directly. In fact, I know the crew were busy late into the night getting the last of the crates of oranges ready for final delivery to the Abbey this morning." "Oh, I thought I saw his crew moving lots of crates late into yesterday evening. I thought unloading ships was strictly forbidden at night, but it was for the Abbey." Westminster Bank of Richard Doyle. I'm pleased to see you again, Chad. We've had some developments. Please come in, and we'll discuss it further. Did Mr. Turner, your employee, ever show up? Is he here now? That is what we need to talk about. After you left, I went through the account of Mr. Doyle as well. It became clear there are some problems with the record-keeping. In fact, the balance does not add up. The figures are incorrect. Yes, all the deposits and outgoings are correct, but when you tally them up, the balance does not equal what it should be. I'm afraid to say Mr. Turner has been siphoning off the account, and I hope no one will be told of this matter. He is now on the run, but with your permission, I would like to notify the policing authorities of London and have them bring him to us. Little did he know, though, I employ someone who works at night to make copies of all the daily transactions. I was able to find a copy of Mr. Doyley's full account records, which you can now see. We will catch Mr. Turner before he has the chance to leave the country. But please rest assured my bank will replenish the account immediately to what it should be. There is over £3,500 missing. Yes, of course, it must be pursued, and urgently. I've got some other loose ends to tie up, but it looks like we've got to the bottom of August Fame's heavy losses. It probably isn't the captain at all. Imagine the swindler was the bank employee. Chad settled down with a set of records in the back office, unsure of his auditing approach. He mutters to himself, I guess I'll record all the incomings and outgoings for the year and compare them to the records Richard gave me. Chad then proceeds to the shipping office at Billingsgate, and he obtains all the weighbridge and import records pertaining to the August Fame. He then returns to the Merry Widow pub, and he sits at his desk by the window of his rented room and sifts through paperwork of the Abbey, the bank records, and the government shipping office. It is clear the captain of August Fame is not in the wrong, and the losses have a more sinister financial fraud at Doyley's bank. Happy with his conclusion, he writes up a cryptic note so as not to reveal too many important details and places the correspondence in a tube. Chad reaches down and opens the cage and finds one of the messenger birds, attaches the tube to his leg. Chad opens the window and sighs a big sigh of relief, smiles, and releases the pigeon. The case is closed. He has solved Doyley's mystery. Chad readies himself to make the return voyage home, and he leaves the pub to try and locate Earl, the boatsman. Later that evening he can be seen enjoying his last meal and ale at the Merry Widow. The following morning he releases another bird with a special note, asking Eva to meet him in the afternoon at St. James's Church for the final road home.